"You'll never be more than a burden to this family," my mother-in-law said, her voice sharp enough to slice through my chest. I just stood there, clutching the grocery bag that had torn open, spilling rice all over their polished marble floor. Her son, my husband, didn't even look up from his phone. He just smirked. That was the moment I realized I wasn't part of their family. I was their help. I had been married for 2 years at that point. 2 long, humiliating years. When I first married Jake, I thought I was marrying love itself. He was charming, soft-spoken, and always promised me we'd build something together. But when I moved into his parents' home, together quickly turned into me doing everything: cooking, cleaning, even ironing his father's shirts before work. I told myself it was temporary, that we'd save money, move out soon. But months turned into years, and every day I lost another piece of myself. It wasn't just the chores. It was the way they treated me. Every morning, my father-in-law would joke, "Maybe if you found a job, Sarah, we wouldn't have to feed another mouth." My mother-in-law would add, "She can't handle a real job. She can't even handle a pan without burning it." And Jake, he'd laugh along. Every single time. I'd try to talk to him later in private. "Jake, why do you let them say that?" He'd shrug. "You're too sensitive. They're just joking." I wanted to scream, but I swallowed my anger. I kept thinking if I stayed kind, if I worked harder, maybe they'd finally respect me. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Then came the night everything broke. It was a Friday evening, and I'd just finished cleaning the kitchen after cooking for all 6 of them. My hands smelled like onion and bleach. I sat down for a second, just to breathe, when I heard them laughing in the living room. "She really thinks she's one of us," my sister-in-law giggled. "Oh please," my mother-in-law replied, "she doesn't even bring in a paycheck. She's living off my son's pity." And then Jake said something that still echoes in my head. "Yeah, I told her she could start a business, but she'd probably quit halfway like she quits everything." They laughed louder. I sat frozen, staring at the flickering TV reflection on the counter. My chest tightened. I felt small and visible. But that night, something inside me snapped. I went to our room, shut the door, and sat in the dark. For the first time, I wasn't crying. I wasn't begging myself to forgive them. I was thinking. I realized something. I'd spent years trying to prove my worth to people who enjoyed watching me fail. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I was going to build something of my own. Something so undeniable that one day, they'd have no choice but to look up at me. The next morning, I woke up early. Jake was still asleep. I made him coffee, put it on the nightstand, and quietly packed my bag. When he woke up, he looked confused. "Where are you going?" "To work," I said simply. He frowned. "You don't have a job." I smiled for the first time in a long time. Not yet. I left that house with $200 in my wallet and no backup plan, but I had something stronger, anger that had finally turned into fuel. I found a small shared office space downtown. I remember the smell of old coffee and the sound of cheap fans buzzing. I sat at a rented desk with my laptop and wrote my plan, Sarah Miller Consulting. It sounded ridiculous at first. Me, a consultant? I didn't even have a client. But I had worked as an assistant before marriage. I knew how small businesses ran. Invoices, scheduling, client calls. I'd done it all quietly for other people. This time, I'd do it for myself. Every evening, I'd come back home exhausted, pretending I'd gone grocery shopping. I didn't tell Jake or his family. Not yet. Because this time, I wanted my actions to speak. Weeks turned into months. I worked day and night, building a small website, posting ads online, reaching out to local salons, therapists, and realtors who needed admin help. My first client was a local dentist's office. They paid me $300 a week. It felt like $1 million. I remember cashing that first check and crying in my car, not because of the money, but because for the first time in years, I'd earned something that was mine. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Jake. Not yet. Because revenge isn't about shouting. It's about waiting. And I was just getting started. For 3 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was the quiet, submissive daughter-in-law, folding laundry, serving tea, smiling when my mother-in-law criticized my cooking. By night, I was building something no one saw coming. My small admin service was growing. That first dentist referred me to a friend who owned a spa, then a local fitness coach. Soon, I had 5 clients. I was juggling calls, scheduling systems, invoices, and emails like I'd been doing it forever. And I loved it. For the first time in years, I felt alive. But living a secret life wasn't easy. Jake started noticing I wasn't always home. "Where were you?" he'd ask. "Just at the store," I'd reply, forcing a smile. Sometimes I'd come home late, still smelling like the printer ink from my office. He didn't push too hard. He was too self-involved, busy with his friends and gym sessions. But his mother noticed. Of course she did. One night, she cornered me in the kitchen. "You've been acting strange, Sarah. Where do you keep disappearing to?" I stirred the soup and said, "Just some errands." She narrowed her eyes. "Don't lie. You're not smart enough to lie." I wanted to tell her everything, that I was finally making something of myself, that her opinion no longer mattered. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. The truth was, my success terrified me as much as it thrilled me. I was earning money, real money. I'd saved up $6,000. Enough for a small apartment if I wanted to leave. But I wasn't ready to leave without showing them who I had become. So I waited. I kept growing my business quietly. Within 6 months, I had 12 clients. I hired a part-time assistant, a college girl named Megan. She was bright, energetic, and reminded me of who I used to be. Together, we rebranded the business. Miller Virtual Solutions. It sounded professional, solid. We made a website, a logo, even printed business cards. I still remember holding that first glossy card and whispering, "This is just the beginning." Meanwhile, home life got worse. Jake had started drinking more. Every night he came home late, smelling like cheap cologne and arrogance. One night he stumbled in and said, "You know, my mom was right, you'll never be successful. You should just focus on being a wife." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I didn't even know who he was anymore. I whispered, "You'll regret saying that." He laughed. "Oh yeah. What are you gonna do? Cry about it?" "No. Not anymore." A few weeks later, I moved into my own small office space. Not just a rented desk, but my name on the glass door. It was tiny, but it had light. Real sunlight streaming through the window. That same week, I landed my biggest client yet, a real estate firm that needed full-time virtual admin and client scheduling support. It was a $3,000 monthly contract. When I got the email confirmation, my hands shook so much I could barely type "thank you." That night, I withdrew all my savings, packed my clothes, and left a note on the kitchen table. "Don't wait up. You'll hear about me soon." I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment. It was quiet, but it was mine. I slept on the floor the first night because I didn't have a bed yet, and I didn't care. I felt light. I felt free. Jake called me the next day, furious. "What the hell, Sarah? You embarrassed me in front of my family." I replied calmly, "You did that to yourself." Then I hung up. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. The next few months were a blur of work and growth. I was working with small businesses all over the state, dental clinics, salons, law offices. They trusted me to handle their schedules, clients, and operations. My clients called me Ms. Miller. Some even assumed I ran a large agency because of how professional everything looked. I didn't correct them. By the end of that year, I made my first $100,000. I remember sitting in that same office, looking out the window, thinking, they laughed at me for not having a paycheck. Now, I make more than all of them combined. But here's the thing about revenge. It never feels complete until they see it. And fate, or maybe karma, gave me that chance sooner than I expected. One morning, I was in my office reviewing client emails when my assistant, Megan, peeked in. Sarah, there's a walk-in asking to speak with you. Says it's about consulting. Do we have an appointment?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. But she said she's your mother-in-law." I froze. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and said, "Send her in." When she walked in, she looked older. Tired. Her tone was polite, careful. "Sarah," she said softly. "It's been a while." "Yes," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "It has." She sat down. adjusting her purse nervously. We need help. Your father-in-law's business isn't doing well. We heard you run some kind of consulting company. I looked at her, the same woman who once said I wasn't smart enough to lie, and I smiled. Of course, Mrs. Miller, I said sweetly. You can book an appointment with my assistant. We'll fit you in next week. Her jaw dropped. An appointment? With you? I nodded. Yes. We're quite busy these days. And just like that, the tables had turned. They used to laugh while I scrubbed their floors. Now they sit in my lobby waiting for me. The first few minutes of that meeting felt like a lifetime. My mother-in-law sat across from me, still pretending to be composed, but I could see her hands trembling slightly on her designer purse. You've done well for yourself, she said carefully, her tone walking the line between surprise and disbelief. I smiled. Thank you. It's been a long road. She nodded, glancing around my office. The neat shelves, the soft lighting, the framed photo of me shaking hands with a client. I could almost hear the gears in her head turning. She had spent years mocking me for having no direction. Now, she was sitting in my office, trying to figure out how I had become the person she said I'd never be. Your father-in-law's company is going through a bad patch, she began, lowering her voice. We're behind on scheduling and client management. One of our staff quit unexpectedly. We heard you do something with business operations. I folded my hands, maintaining my professional tone. Yes, Miller Virtual Solutions provides admin and operations support for small to mid-size firms. We help with scheduling, data management, invoicing, process improvement, that sort of thing. Her eyes flickered with a hint of pride, but it was quickly buried under discomfort. So, would you be able to take us on? For a split second, I wanted to say no, to remind her how she once called me useless. But revenge isn't about shouting. It's about control. And control means being the one who gets to say when and how. So I said, of course. We can help you. My assistant will send you our pricing and available slots. Her expression faltered. Oh. Pricing. Yes, I said smoothly. We have packages starting at $2,000 a month. For your company size, I'd recommend our premium plan, $3,500. She blinked, visibly stunned. That's a lot. I smiled politely. Quality service always is. When she left, Megan walked in and whispered, That was your mother-in-law? I nodded, exhaling slowly. Yes. Her eyes widened. Wow. That must have felt amazing. I looked at the door where my mother-in-law had exited and whispered, It did. But it's just the beginning. 2 days later, I received a call from my father-in-law himself. Sarah, he began in his usual booming tone, I didn't think we'd be talking under these circumstances, but your mother-in-law says you might help us streamline our operations. Yes, I replied calmly. We'd be glad to take you on as a client. Would you like to schedule an onboarding session? He chuckled awkwardly. I guess so. And I'll admit, I underestimated you. That line stayed with me for days. Because coming from him, the man who once said I was lucky Jake tolerated me, it felt like justice. I assigned Megan to handle their account setup, but I personally oversaw their first meeting. When Jake showed up unexpectedly with his parents, my stomach flipped. He looked almost exactly the same. Arrogant posture, expensive shoes, fake confidence. But the second his eyes met mine, I saw it. Shock. He hadn't expected me to look this different. Confident. Composed. Untouchable. Sarah, he said, forcing a smirk, didn't expect to see you running an office. I replied evenly, I didn't expect you to still be living with your parents. The silence that followed was delicious. I handed them a client intake form and said, Please fill this out so we can start the contract. Jake frowned. We have to fill this out? We're family. I smiled politely. At Miller Virtual Solutions, everyone starts the same way. Even family. He hesitated, then took the form. Over the next few weeks, their company officially became my client. I trained their secretary, fixed their billing system, and streamlined their appointment scheduling. They were paying me thousands every month, and every payment reminder went directly to my mother-in-law's inbox. Sometimes she'd call, flustered. Sarah, do we really need to pay this invoice so soon? Yes, Mrs. Miller. I'd reply sweetly. It's part of our contract terms. It was professional, polite, and oh, it was glorious. But revenge isn't just about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't just want to beat them. I wanted to build something that outlasted the bitterness. So I expanded. I started offering team management software, training sessions, and strategic planning for small businesses. My name began circulating in local business circles. I started getting invited to events, not as someone's wife, but as Sarah Miller, founder and CEO. One day, a reporter from a local magazine reached out for an interview. The headline later read, "From Homemaker to CEO, How Sarah Miller Built an Empire from Scratch." The article went viral locally. And guess who shared it first on Facebook? My mother-in-law. The caption read, "So proud of our daughter-in-law's success." I stared at it for a while, not angry, not amused, just calm. Because when the people who laughed at your struggle start using your name for their validation, that's when you know you've truly won. A few months later, something unexpected happened. Jake showed up at my office again. No parents this time. Just him, standing awkwardly in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "Can we talk?" he said quietly. I looked at him for a long moment. The man who once mocked me for dreaming. The man who laughed while I cried. And now he looked small. "Yes," I said. "But make it quick." Jake stood there like a man who'd rehearsed an apology but didn't know how to say it. His voice was lower than I remembered. "You look different." I crossed my arms. That tends to happen when people stop being walked on. He flinched a little, then sighed. "Look, I know I messed up. I shouldn't have." I interrupted. "You shouldn't have what?" Jake laughed. "Insulted me? Let your family treat me like garbage." He looked down. "All of it," he said quietly. "I was stupid. I thought they were right about you." I let out a small laugh. Not out of joy, out of disbelief. "And what changed your mind?" He looked around the office. The glass door with my logo, the polished furniture, the assistant outside taking calls. You. For a brief second, I saw the old Jake, the one who used to hold my hand when life was simple, before pride ruined everything. But I learned too much to let nostalgia trick me again. "Jake," I said, "you didn't believe in me when it mattered. You don't get to admire me now." He nodded slowly. "I deserve that. But can we at least talk? Just once? Maybe dinner." "Dinner?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Jake, this is my workplace, not a dating show." He chuckled nervously. "I just thought we could start over." "Start over?" I leaned forward. "Let me ask you something. When I cried in that kitchen, begging for your support, where were you? When I was working till midnight building this from nothing, who was laughing at me with your mother?" He had no answer. So I stood up and opened the office door. "We're done talking, Jake. My assistant will help your parents with their next invoice." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just nodded, whispered, "You've changed," and walked away. I smiled faintly. That was the point. For the next few weeks, I focused harder than ever. I landed 2 more big clients, a construction firm and a medical clinic. My company grew from 2 people to 7. I rented the office next door and expanded our workspace. Sometimes I'd walk in early in the morning, coffee in hand, look at the glass door with Sarah Miller, so etched on it, and whisper, "You did it." But deep down, I knew something was still unfinished. Not with Jake, he was gone. But with the version of me that once believed I wasn't enough. That version still whispered sometimes late at night, what if they were right? So I decided to do one more thing. Not for revenge, for closure. I signed up for a local entrepreneurship conference. It was hosted at a fancy hotel downtown, with panels featuring business owners, investors, and consultants. One of the keynote speakers was a man who used to run in my father-in-law's circle. When I walked in, dressed in a navy blue suit and heels, I saw him, my father-in-law, sitting in the back row. He looked smaller, quieter, like the last few months had worn him down. When the moderator introduced me, "Next, please welcome Sarah Miller, founder and CEO of Miller Virtual Solutions," I saw his head jerk up in surprise. I took the stage, smiled at the audience, and began. 3 years ago, I was unemployed, living in my in-laws' house, and being told I wasn't worth the air I breathed. Today, my company manages operations for over 20 businesses across 3 states. I paused. The crowd clapped. My father-in-law looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. I continued. Sometimes people will laugh at your struggle because it makes them feel taller. Let them. One day, you'll outgrow the room they're standing in. The applause that followed was thunderous. And I swear in that moment, I finally forgave him. Not for his sake, but for mine. Because forgiveness, I realized, wasn't weakness. It was freedom. After the event, he approached me slowly. "Sarah, you were incredible up there." "Thank you," I said. He cleared his throat. "We're proud of you. Your success has helped our business survive. You probably don't know how many people you've inspired." I smiled gently. "I didn't do it to inspire anyone, Mr. Miller. I did it to survive. The rest just happened." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Still, you've made us eat our words." For the first time, I actually laughed with him. Better late than never. That night, I went home to my quiet apartment, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the window. The city lights flickered outside. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one scrubbing dishes while they mocked her, the one crying in silence. And I whispered, "You made it, Sarah. You really did." I didn't need Jake. I didn't need their approval. I had something better, peace. A month later, my assistant walked into my office with a grin. "Guess what? We just got an inquiry from a new client, a family law firm. They said they were referred by someone named Jake Miller." I laughed softly. "Of course." Megan tilted her head. "Do you want to take the client?" I looked out the window, smiling. "No. Let them wait. Some appointments don't need to be booked." But fate wasn't quite done with me yet. Because one morning, I opened my inbox and saw an email that would change everything. It was from a big corporate firm in Chicago. The subject line read, "Proposal for Partnership, National Expansion Opportunity." I stared at it for a moment, my heart racing, and I realized my story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about becoming unstoppable. I sat there staring at that email like it was some kind of mirage. Proposal for Partnership, National Expansion Opportunity. For a moment, I didn't breathe. I reread it twice, just to make sure it wasn't spam. It wasn't. It was from a senior executive at a major consulting firm in Chicago, one of those companies that charge more in a week than I used to earn in a year. They'd heard about Miller Virtual Solutions from one of my clients and wanted to discuss a potential collaboration. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. This was it. The big break. The kind of email that separates small-town survivors from national contenders. And I knew instantly I was going to take it. 2 weeks later, I flew to Chicago. The morning of the meeting, the air was freezing, the kind that stings your nose when you breathe. I stood outside the high-rise building downtown, clutching a folder with my proposal. The glass reflected the skyline, and my reflection in it looked like someone I barely recognized. Gone was the girl who cried in a kitchen while people laughed at her. Now, there stood a woman who ran a company, who paid salaries, who signed contracts. When I entered the boardroom, there were 5 executives waiting. All men, all older, all skeptical, until I started speaking. I presented my process, my team, my track record. I talked about how small businesses were being underserved in digital operations and how we had created scalable systems to fix that. By the time I finished, the room was quiet. The chairman leaned forward. "Sarah, how soon can you handle a national rollout?" I smiled. "Give me 90 days. When I left that meeting, my phone buzzed with a text from Megan. "Mrs. Miller is here again. Waiting in the lobby. Should I tell her you're out of town?" I replied, "No. Tell her to email me instead. We're only handling appointments through official channels now." Revenge wasn't about rubbing success in someone's face. It was about making them realize they couldn't reach you the way they used to. When I returned home, things moved fast. The Chicago deal went through. They wanted Miller Virtual Solutions to manage administrative outsourcing for 40 of their client companies. I hired a team of 10, then 20. By mid-year, I opened a second office, the kind with glass walls, modern furniture, and my name engraved at the reception desk. The first time I walked through those doors, I actually stopped for a second just to take it in. Everything they once mocked me for being too ambitious, too emotional, too soft, had built this. Then came the day everything came full circle. It was a Friday afternoon, and my receptionist called my office. "Sarah, there's a Mr. and Mrs. Miller here to see you." They said it's urgent. For a moment, I considered saying I was unavailable. But then, I smiled. "Send them in." They walked in together. My father-in-law looked uncomfortable in his old business suit. My mother-in-law was trying hard to look calm. "Sarah," he began, clearing his throat. "We wanted to talk personally, not as clients." I gestured toward the chairs. "Go ahead." He hesitated. "We've been thinking a lot about everything. About how we treated you." His wife looked down, avoiding my eyes. For once, she had no sharp words, no smirk. Just silence. He continued, "You've built something incredible. We see your name everywhere. Articles, events, even the bank manager mentioned you the other day. We just wanted to say we're sorry." For a few seconds, I couldn't say anything. That apology, the one I used to dream about, suddenly felt smaller than I'd imagined. Because the truth was, I didn't need it anymore. I smiled gently. "Thank you. I appreciate that." My mother-in-law finally spoke. "We didn't know better, Sarah. We thought success looked one way. You proved us wrong." I nodded. "That's okay. Life has a way of teaching lessons to all of us." She glanced around my office, her voice trembling. "You know, it's ironic. We spent years talking about how you'd never amount to anything. And now," she stopped mid-sentence. "And now you wait in my lobby for appointments?" I said quietly. Her lips parted, and for a moment, she almost smiled. "Yes," she admitted. "Now we wait." They left soon after, and I sat at my desk for a long time, watching the sun dip below the city skyline. There was no joy, no vengeance burning in my chest, just calm. Because I'd learned that revenge wasn't the end goal. Respect was. And even if they couldn't give it to me back then, I'd earned it myself. Later that night, Jake called again. "Sarah," he said, "I saw the article about your expansion. You're unbelievable." I stayed silent. He hesitated. "Do you ever think about us?" I replied softly, "No, Jake. I think about who I became because of us." He exhaled, long and slow. "You deserve everything you have." And before I could answer, he said something I didn't expect. "I started therapy. I'm trying to be better." For the first time, I believed him. And maybe that was the real ending. Not revenge, but redemption. For both of us. As I hung up, I looked around my office. The framed certificates, the soft hum of productivity from my team, the distant laughter from Megan in the next room. I whispered, "You did it, Sarah. And you did it your way." Then I turned off the light, stepped out into the hallway, and locked the door behind me, smiling as I passed the sign that read, "Miller Virtual Solutions. By appointment only." The national expansion changed everything. What started as a one-woman operation had now become a registered corporation, Miller Virtual Group, LLC. I had an HR department, a marketing team, and even a finance officer. Sometimes I'd walk through the office floor, rows of employees on calls, the buzz of keyboards, and have to remind myself that I built this from nothing. From the same kitchen where I once scrubbed dishes while being told I was too soft to survive in the real world. Now, I was the real world. But success has a strange way of bringing ghosts back to your door. One morning, I received a LinkedIn message from someone I hadn't heard from in years, Jake's sister, Melissa. Her message was short. "Hi Sarah, I know this might sound strange, but I'm looking for work. I saw your company is hiring for client coordinators. Would you consider me?" I sat there, reading it over and over. Melissa, the same woman who once told me, "You'll never make it without Jake." It was tempting to delete it, to pretend I never saw it. But I didn't. I wrote back, "Hi Melissa, thank you for reaching out. Please apply through our website. Our HR department handles all applications." Polite, professional, and distant, exactly how she had once been with me. A few weeks later, HR shortlisted her for an interview. I didn't interfere. I wanted to see if she could get through it on her own merits. When I saw her name on the final selection list, I smiled. She'd earned the job. Fairly. The first day she joined, she walked into my office nervously. "Sarah," she said softly, "I didn't think you'd actually let me work here." I looked up from my desk. "I don't hold grudges, Melissa. I just remember who helped me and who didn't." She nodded, guilt flickering in her eyes. I was young. And stupid. I smiled faintly. So was I. We both learned. Over time, she turned out to be one of my most efficient employees. She stayed late, never complained, and never once mentioned the past. But every now and then, when our eyes met in a meeting, I could tell she was thinking it. How did Sarah become the one giving orders? By the end of that year, my company was featured in Women in Business Weekly under the headline, "The Power of Persistence: How Sarah Miller Redefined Resilience." That article hit differently, because it wasn't about revenge or survival anymore. It was about purpose. I'd started donating to programs that helped women start small online businesses. Women who had no support, no voice, and no belief left in themselves. I saw my old self in every one of them. One day, I visited a workshop where a woman in her 50s asked me, "How did you stay strong when everyone doubted you?" I told her the truth. At first, I didn't. I broke down, over and over. But every time I did, I built something stronger out of the pieces. That night, after the event, I sat alone in my office. The lights were dim, the city outside alive with motion. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Jake again. He'd sent me a photo of my old wedding ring, sitting in a small wooden box. His message read, "I'm moving on too. Thought you'd want closure." I stared at it for a while. Then I replied simply, "I already found mine." And I meant it. Weeks later, I received a formal invitation to speak at a national business conference as a keynote speaker. When I stepped onto that stage, in front of hundreds of entrepreneurs, I started my speech the same way I started my journey, with the truth. Someone once told me I'd never be enough, that I'd never succeed. Today, I employ 60 people and manage over 100 businesses across the country. But that's not what success means to me. Success is the moment you stop waiting for permission to be who you already are. The crowd stood and clapped. And for a fleeting second, I saw it, the memory of that scared woman in her in-laws' kitchen. She smiled at me. And then she faded. After the conference, Melissa came up to me backstage. She hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "You were right, Sarah," she whispered. "People do change. I see it every day in you." I hugged her back. We all get our chance to grow, Melissa. Some of us just have to start from rock bottom. That night, I went home to my quiet apartment. It wasn't the biggest or the fanciest, but it had peace, the kind I used to pray for. I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window, and looked at the city lights. I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd built in its place. And I realized something that made me laugh softly to myself. They used to mock me for living off their son. Now their daughter worked for me. But even that wasn't the victory. The victory was that I didn't feel like a victim anymore. Because I'd stopped trying to prove I was enough for them. And started proving I was enough for myself. Success brought me a kind of silence I hadn't expected. It wasn't lonely, just quiet. The kind that comes after a long storm, when you realize you've been bracing for thunder for years, and suddenly there's only calm. But calm can be deceptive. It gives your mind space to ask questions you've been avoiding. Like, who am I now that I've finally won? And what do you do when winning doesn't feel like revenge anymore? It feels like responsibility. The Chicago partnership had gone beyond anything I'd dreamed. My company now managed administrative and digital operations for nearly 80 clients across 4 states. I had regional managers, regular board meetings, quarterly reviews, all the big boss things I used to imagine doing someday. Except now someday was every day. And sometimes when the office lights dimmed and my staff went home, I'd stare at the skyline and wonder, did I build this to prove something, or to find myself? One Thursday night, after a 12-hour workday, Melissa came into my office holding a cup of coffee. "You've been here since morning," she said. "You should go home." I gave a tired smile. "Home? I don't even know what that means anymore." She hesitated, then said softly, I talked to Mom yesterday. She said Dad's health isn't great. He's been asking about you. I leaned back in my chair. About me? Or about business? She shrugged. Maybe both. That weekend, I decided to visit them. Not out of guilt, but closure. It had been almost 2 years since I'd walked out of that house with nothing but a backpack and anger. When I arrived, my mother-in-law opened the door. Her face softened instantly. "Sarah," she whispered. "You look happy." "I am," I said simply. The house looked smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally. Like it had shrunk since I stopped carrying their approval on my shoulders. My father-in-law was sitting on the couch, a blanket over his legs. When he saw me, he smiled faintly. "Sarah," he said, "you're doing good out there." "I am," I said, sitting down across from him. "And I'm sorry you're not feeling well." He nodded slowly. "You know, I was hard on you. Maybe harder than I should have been." I didn't say anything. He continued. "You reminded me of myself when I was young. Ambitious. Stubborn. And maybe that's why I fought you so much, because I saw myself losing control." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was honest. And for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness. I felt compassion. When I left that night, my mother-in-law followed me to the door. "Sarah," she said softly, "I don't know if we deserve forgiveness, but thank you for coming." I turned to her. "You don't need to earn forgiveness. You just have to stop repeating the reason you needed it." She nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. As I drove home, I realized something. Sometimes revenge isn't about flipping the power, it's about breaking the cycle. A few weeks later, I found myself on a panel for women in leadership. The moderator asked, "Sarah, what's the hardest thing about rising from rock bottom to the top?" I thought for a moment and said, "Honestly, it's realizing that success doesn't heal you. It just gives you the freedom to start healing." The room went silent. And in that silence, I felt peace again. One night, as I was locking up the office, my phone rang. It was Jake. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "I just wanted to tell you. I'm engaged." I smiled. "That's good, Jake. I'm happy for you." He hesitated. "You sure?" "Yes. Truly. You deserve peace too." There was a long pause. Then he said, "You know, I used to think you left me because you stopped loving me. But now I get it. You left because you started loving yourself." That one line hit harder than I expected. Because he was right. After we hung up, I stood by the office window again. The same view, the same lights, the same city that had once made me feel small. And I whispered, "This time, I'm not fighting anyone. Not even myself." I wasn't the woman who needed revenge anymore. I was the woman who had rewritten her entire story. A few months later, I launched the Miller Foundation, a nonprofit branch of my company that funded small business training for women leaving abusive or restrictive environments. We gave them laptops, mentorship, and most importantly, hope. And on our first workshop day, I looked at the crowd of nervous faces and said, "If anyone ever told you that you're not enough, they were lying. You're just unfinished." That night, I got home, took off my heels, and sat on the couch with a quiet smile. For the first time in years, I wasn't replaying the insults. I wasn't imagining revenge. I was simply living. Because my story didn't end with them waiting in my lobby. It began when I stopped waiting for their approval. Peace sounds simple, but it's not. It's quiet, yes, but it's also demanding. It forces you to sit with the parts of yourself you ignored while fighting to survive. I learned that the hard way. After the Miller Foundation launched, my days became longer than ever. Between running the company, mentoring women, and speaking at events, I was burning out. Everyone saw the confident CEO. No one saw the woman who sat in her car at midnight with her head against the steering wheel, wondering if she could keep up. I used to think the fight ended when you won. Turns out, victory brings its own battles: loneliness, exhaustion, pressure. One evening, during a mentoring session, a young woman named Tara said something that hit me right in the chest. She said, "Sarah, how did you know when it was time to stop proving yourself?" I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Because I hadn't stopped. Not really. Every success, every project, every late-night email. It was all still driven by that old wound, the need to prove them wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my balcony, staring at the city lights, realizing I had built an empire on the same pain I thought I'd escaped. The next morning, I called my therapist. Yes, therapist. Because healing, I'd learned, doesn't happen automatically when you succeed. During our session, she asked, "When was the last time you did something for yourself, not your company, not your cause, you?" I thought for a long time and said quietly, "I don't remember." She smiled. "Then maybe it's time to remember." A week later, I booked my first real vacation. Alone. No laptop. No emails. Just me and a small coastal town in Maine. It was strange at first. Waking up without a schedule, eating breakfast without checking notifications. I walked along the shore, let the cold waves hit my feet, and for the first time in years, I breathed, deeply, fully. On the third morning, I met an older woman sitting by the pier, sketching. We talked for hours. She told me she used to be a business owner too, until one day, she sold everything and started painting. When I asked why, she said, "Because success is loud. Peace is quiet. And you can't hear yourself if you never stop listening to the noise." Those words stayed with me long after I came home. When I returned to the office, something had shifted. I still worked hard, but differently. I started delegating more, trusting my team, saying no to projects that didn't align with my peace. Megan once joked, "You're getting soft." I smiled. No. I'm finally learning that softness doesn't mean weakness. And strangely enough, the more I slowed down, the faster the company grew. Because peace gave me clarity. Clarity gave me vision. And vision built everything else. One afternoon, I visited the Foundation's new training center. The walls were covered with photos of women who'd graduated from our programs, small business owners, freelancers, entrepreneurs. One of them, a single mom named Jenna, hugged me tightly. "You changed my life," she said. I hugged her back. "No, Jenna. You changed it. I just reminded you that you could." As I left, I noticed something I hadn't before. The sign on the wall said, "Empowered by Miller." I smiled, because that's exactly what I had become. Empowered, not by revenge, not by validation, but by growth. Later that night, I received a call from Melissa. "Mom's been volunteering at the foundation," she said, her voice bright. "She's helping with admin work. Can you believe that?" I laughed softly. "You're kidding." "Nope," she replied. "She says it makes her feel useful again. I think she's trying to make things right in her own way." That one sentence made me pause. Because maybe, just maybe, healing wasn't one-sided after all. Weeks passed. Life finally felt balanced. My mornings began with yoga and silence instead of spreadsheets and alarms. My evenings ended with gratitude, not anxiety. And one Sunday, as I sat by my window journaling, I realized something beautiful. The woman I used to be, scared, small, desperate, wasn't gone. She had simply evolved. She was still inside me whispering, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled and closed my notebook. Because I had learned the greatest truth of all. You can't rewrite the past, but you can redefine it. And that's exactly what I did. If someone had told me years ago that I'd one day stand on a stage teaching other women how to rebuild their lives, I would have laughed through tears. But life has a way of turning pain into curriculum. The Miller Foundation had grown faster than I expected. We now had centers in 3 cities, each offering free business mentoring, computer training, and small grants for women starting over. Every story that came through those doors reminded me of myself, raw, hurt, determined. I spent my mornings at the main office and my afternoons at the foundation. One day, as I was reviewing grant applications, I noticed a familiar name, Linda Harper. It took me a moment to process. Linda, my old manager from the job I had before marriage. The one who told me I wasn't leadership material. The same woman who once denied me a promotion because I didn't have the right attitude. And now, her application sat in front of me, requesting funding for her small home bakery. For a moment, I didn't know how to feel. The irony was almost cinematic. She'd written, "After losing my corporate job, I decided to start fresh and turn my passion into a business." I'm seeking mentorship and financial support to grow. Old habits kicked in. Part of me wanted to reject it. But I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "You've outgrown revenge, Sarah." So I signed the approval form, with one note at the bottom. Approved. Welcome to the next chapter. A few weeks later, Linda came to the foundation's office. When she saw me, her eyes widened. "Sarah, I didn't realize that I'd be here." I finished for her, smiling. She nodded, embarrassed. "You've really come a long way." "So have you," I said gently. "You're still standing. That's what matters." She exhaled slowly, almost in relief. "You could have turned me away." "I could have," I said, "but I remember what it felt like when people decided I wasn't worth a second chance. I'm not going to be that person for someone else." That day, I realized the full circle wasn't about seeing others fall. It was about learning how to rise without stepping on them. The more I mentored women like Linda, the more I saw pieces of my old life, not to haunt me, but to remind me of how far I'd come. It was strange. The same voices that once broke me were now learning from me. And instead of anger, I felt gratitude, because without them, there would be no me. That winter, I was invited to deliver a closing keynote at the National Women's Empowerment Summit. I stood backstage in a navy dress, holding my speech notes, listening to the audience cheer for the speaker before me. When they called my name, "Please welcome Sarah Miller, founder of the Miller Group and the Miller Foundation." The applause felt like an embrace from every woman who'd ever been told she wasn't enough. I walked onto the stage, looked at the sea of faces, and began. When I started, I wasn't building a business. I was building a way out. Out of pain, out of fear, out of silence. And along the way, I realized success isn't about being better than the people who doubted you. It's about becoming the person you once doubted you could be. Because the world doesn't change when you win a fight. It changes when you decide you're not going to fight the wrong battles anymore. The crowd erupted. But in the noise, I felt something softer, the quiet echo of peace. After the speech, as I stepped off the stage, a woman from the audience approached me, crying, "Sarah, I just left an abusive marriage. I'm scared. But your story," she wiped her eyes, "it made me believe I can survive too." I held her hands. "You already have. The hardest part is leaving the room they convinced you was home." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. And in that moment, I realized this was what all of it was for. Not the revenge. Not the success. The ripple effect. When I got home that night, I placed the conference badge on my desk next to an old photograph, a faded picture of me and Jake from years ago, smiling in that same house that once felt like a cage. I didn't feel bitterness anymore. Just gratitude for the pain that pushed me, for the people who underestimated me, for the version of me that refused to stay broken. Because without all of it, there'd be no Sarah Miller, the woman who turned humiliation into healing. As I turned off the lamp, my phone buzzed. A message from Melissa. "Mom says hi. She's baking cookies for the foundation staff tomorrow. Can she drop them off?" I smiled and typed back, "Of course. Tell her to come by at noon. We'll make coffee." Full circle. No tears, no anger. Just coffee, cookies, and peace. The day my mother-in-law came to the foundation with her tray of cookies was the day I realized my story wasn't about revenge at all. It was about redemption, theirs and mine. She walked in quietly, dressed in her usual floral blouse, holding a tray covered in foil. For a moment, she looked like the woman I first met years ago. Proud, composed, impossible to please. But now, there was humility in her eyes. "Sarah," she said softly, "I brought these for your team. Just a little thank you." I smiled and gestured toward the kitchen. "They'll love that. You've been volunteering a lot lately." She nodded, looking around the office. The open space filled with laughter, papers, and women planning their dreams. "This place, it's beautiful," she whispered. "It's healing," I said simply. She took a deep breath. "I wish I'd understood sooner how strong you were. We were so focused on what you weren't that we couldn't see what you were becoming." Her voice trembled. "You didn't deserve the way we treated you." For the first time, I reached out and held her hand. "We all grow differently, Mrs. Miller. Some of us learn through pain, some through grace. What matters is that we learn." She smiled through tears. Call me Elaine. You've earned that. Later that evening, as I locked up, I noticed her tray of cookies had been nearly emptied. My staff had left thank you notes on top, colorful sticky notes with scribbles like, "Delicious," and "You're the best, Mrs. M." I laughed quietly to myself. That kitchen where I was once mocked had turned into a place where her cookies were celebrated. That's how life works sometimes. Full circle, without fanfare. Just small, quiet moments that rewrite everything. Months passed peacefully. My company continued to grow, but I started working fewer hours. I spent more time mentoring, traveling, and writing. People started asking if I'd ever publish a book about my journey. At first, I hesitated. But one night, I opened my laptop and began typing the first line. They laughed at my struggle until they saw me rise. It poured out of me, not bitterness but truth. The story of a woman who was broken down until she built herself back up, piece by piece, not to destroy anyone else, but to rediscover her own worth. When the book was finally published, I sent one signed copy to my old address, the house I once called home. I didn't expect a reply, but 2 weeks later, I received a small envelope in return. Inside was a handwritten note. Dear Sarah, I finished your book in one sitting. I cried through half of it. You reminded me that sometimes we fail people not because we don't love them, but because we don't understand their kind of strength. Thank you for teaching me what it looks like to start over. With grace. Love. Elaine. I held that note for a long time. It wasn't an apology. It was acceptance. And that was enough. A year later, the foundation hosted its biggest event yet, a celebration for women who had completed their training and launched businesses of their own. Hundreds of guests filled the hall, mothers, daughters, friends, dreamers. As I stood on stage looking at them, I saw my younger self in every single one. The woman who used to whisper, "I can't." The woman who was told, "You'll never be enough." The woman who believed she needed permission to shine. I raised the microphone and said, "Years ago, I thought my story ended when I walked out of a house that no longer felt like home. But it didn't end there. It began there. Because sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you isn't the end of your life story. It's just the start of your becoming." The applause that followed wasn't for me. It was for every woman who had ever stood back up after being broken. After the event, I stepped outside into the evening air. The city lights glowed softly in the distance. A gentle wind brushed my face, carrying the sound of laughter from the hall behind me. I took a deep breath and smiled. The kind of smile that comes from knowing the war is finally over, not because you defeated your enemies, but because you no longer need to fight them. I whispered to the wind, "You did it, Sarah. You turned pain into purpose." Then I turned and walked back inside, ready to celebrate with the women who now called me mentor, leader, and friend. They once laughed at my struggles. Now they quote my words. They once dismissed my worth. Now they learn from my story. And the best part? I no longer need their approval, because I became my own validation.